Hey, welcome back. It's Rudy here. Sorry I've been away for a while. Um, got my day job, picking up all sorts of other stuff, but I'm back. Happy to be back. I'm ready. Have my LaCroix. Yes, I'm that basic, but we'll continue on. A couple of big current events, obviously, happening recently, I wanted to touch on and give some cool insight to. The first one that's been dominating the news, obviously, is the Derek Chauvin verdict. So this was interesting to me because I wasn't sure which way this was going to go. I thought it was going to be pretty close, at least in terms of being able to prove the murder charges. My prediction was that he was going to be convicted on the manslaughter charge and probably not be convicted on the murder charges, just based on the quality of the evidence and the quality of the prosecution's case. Obviously, that didn't happen. He was found guilty on all three charges, which is fine. I think this is just for me. I thought he deserved to be convicted of something. I was kind of ambivalent as to exactly what I wanted to. I wanted him to be held accountable for his actions, and I figured that the legal case would pretty much take care of itself. But I am surprised that he was convicted of all three. That was surprising to me. I mean, clearly the jury wanted to send a message, right? This was, I think, clearly a case where they wanted to make a a clear statement about the accountability that they thought needed to be had in this case, and that's totally fair. I have pulled up on the screen here. This is courtesy of CNN. They've gone over the charges that were levied against Chauvin. So we've got second degree unintentional murder, third degree murder, second degree manslaughter. And if you read through this, yeah, it's interesting because the second degree unintentional murder charge basically requires you to unintentionally kill someone in the act of committing a felony. And I guess the way the prosecution asserted this was basically saying that Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd was itself the felony, and then Floyd's death caused the murder charge. Normally, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just a guy on the internet, right? But my perception was that normally with a charge like that, the felony would have to be almost an entirely like a separate crime, right? So if you're committing a robbery and you unintentionally kill someone, that makes sense as a linkage in terms of going from one crime to another, and then someone dies. In this case, to me, it feels more like kneeling on George Floyd was one act that caused George Floyd's, or was one of the things that caused George Floyd's death. So it's interesting to me that they were able to convince the jury to view it as two separate acts. So first, the kneeling, which they basically described, I think, as like felonious assault, and then finally allowing him or causing him to die. So it's just interesting how they kind of interpreted that little turn of phrase. The next one, third degree murder, causing death by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind. So, an act eminently dangerous to others, I think they were able to define that as being able to include George Floyd himself, as a specific act as opposed to just an act that was considered dangerous to other people at large or the people around. So that's another case where the language is being interpreted in a very specific way. Obviously, they did their job in convincing the jury that the facts fit that particular interpretation of the law. And then lastly, second degree manslaughter, culpable negligence whereby a person creates an unreasonable risk and consciously takes chances of causing death or great bodily harm. See, that to me, again, this is just my opinion. I'm certainly not defending the officer and his actions because I don't think they are defensible. But to me, it feels like the second degree manslaughter charge fit the facts of the case most closely. That's just how it feels to me. But again, the jury made up their own mind. They made up their own decision. So I found that very fascinating. Kudos to CNN. Thank you for putting this up so we at least get an idea what the charges were. I wanted to go over a few other things, though, related to the case. So there's a poll that came out. This is put out by Ipsos. They're a polling firm. They've done polls for I think Reuters. This one I think is sponsored by USA Today. But I thought this was super cool. So this is actually a breakdown of how people view the case's outcome. So this is a snap poll that they did immediately after the verdict was released. And they asked people what they thought of the verdict and what they thought specifically, how we should define the death of George Floyd. And I was happy to see this. This is really interesting to me because I get the sense that we're probably more unified on this issue than maybe the media would have us believe. So 40% said it was murder, 32% said it was negligence on the part of the officer, 11% said it was an accident, and then some smaller percentages said that the police officer did nothing wrong, it was something else, or they don't know. So think of this, right? Only 5% of Americans think the police officer did nothing wrong. That is an incredibly small percentage. I mean, I get that there's ways to interpret this, right? So some people thought that it was murder, some negligence, some merely an accident. But we're all united for the most part. 95% of us, actually it's a little bit less than that because of the other things, but let's say 80% of us are united in the fact that we believe the police officer did something wrong. Presumably that means that there should be accountability, right? And if you look at the partisan breakdown, and again, I said in my first video I wasn't going to get super political. I'm not here either. Don't worry about it. This is more just examining the facts, right? But you still have among Republicans who are considered to be, let's say, more pro-police, what is that, 63% saying it was either murder or negligence on the part of the officer. And that's a big statement. I think that we're more closely united on this as a country than we are in a lot of other things, and that makes me happy because we should want there to be accountability. We should respect police officers to the utmost degree for the work that they do, and at the same time also demand a high level of accountability. Those aren't contradictory things. In fact, they're necessary for a functioning society. So I thought this was cool. I thought that this was a positive sign that maybe some healing can take place from this and we can come to some sort of agreement. Now, I will say briefly that I have some misgivings about the trial. And those misgivings about the trial stem from the fact that there was this whole chorus of pressure and media attention around it that makes me wonder if Derek Chauvin, if it was even possible for him to get a fair trial. Because if you think about it, he was fired from the police department. The city, prior to the verdict, announced a massive settlement with George Floyd's family. Perfectly fine, like I get that, but from a timing perspective, just hear me out on this. And then you have politicians wading in, saying that they expected the court to find a specific verdict, and activists threatening to riot and burn down the city if Chauvin was acquitted. And then also the fact, and I should mention this too, that the judge did not sequester the jury, which means he didn't basically keep them apart from regular society and controlling what they can hear and see, etc. He just admonished the jury, telling them not to watch the news. Well, come on. Like, I just don't honestly believe that they had no idea what was going on outside with the external influences. And I wouldn't want to be on that jury. I do not envy them at all. Certainly because, if you were to vote to acquit, I think your life would be very difficult after that point. I think you'd have to either you'd either have to change your identity, change your location, or something like that. It'd be very strange. But here's my issue with all of this. Personally, I think it opens it up to possibly an appeal. And it's not something that I want to see, right? I don't want to see us go through this all over again. It's painful for people. It's divisive. So, and before people, I hope this doesn't happen, but before people have the thought of, well, it doesn't matter if Derek Chauvin gets a fair trial or not, it absolutely does. I mean, it's a constitutional right. It's something afforded to every single American. No matter how heinous the crime or how damning the evidence, everyone is afforded access to a fair trial. And that's a bedrock foundational principle of our legal system. And, that's steeped in history of why that's so important. So I think it is important. And I think it's possibly even more important in a case like this with so much national attention that you get it right. And so I just don't know if that happened. I don't know if it's even possible for that to happen in this case. I wonder if they maybe should have even moved the trial out of Minneapolis to some other jurisdiction, because I just don't know how he could have gotten a fair trial. Again, I'm happy that he was convicted, and I'm not saying, because I really don't know, I'm not saying that all that external influence necessarily impacted the outcome. I hope it didn't. But I do think that's something that we should at least consider and keep in mind. And I hope that it's something that doesn't come up later on appeal. I'm sure they'll file one. Whether it goes anywhere or not is really anyone's guess. But I just thought I'd mention that. We'll see how it plays out as it continues its way through the judicial system. Next thing I wanted to go over, probably last thing for today, is you might have heard about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and how it was halted by the FDA because it was found to have induced blood clots in a few people. Personally, I think this is the height of irresponsibility by the FDA. and I'll tell you why. So this is from Yale Medicine. And they go over the effects of this. But here's the money quote. 6 cases is hardly anything. 6. In 7 million doses given. So we're gonna have a little fun here. We're going to do something that will terrify all of you. Math. I know. Bear with me. So, if we were to take 6 divided by 7 million, that's essentially our decimal fraction of the percentage of people who would actually get clots, right? So 6 out of 7 million. It's a number so small that Windows calculator can't display it properly. Should give you an idea of how small it is. So as a little thought experiment, what we're going to do is we're going to take that number and multiply it by the entire US population. In other words, we're going to simulate what would happen if we were to give the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to every single living American of all ages, man, woman, and child. Let's do that. So we're going to multiply this number times 330 million. That's approximate. Wow. 280, let's round up, 283 people. So if you were to vaccinate every single American with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, 283 people would get blood clots. Now, compare this to the fact that over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID. And you'll begin to understand why I think this was incredibly irresponsible. Yes, the vaccine has a very small amount of risk associated with it. I suppose all vaccines probably do. The Pfizer and Moderna ones have some tiny amount of risk, possibly for allergic reactions, right? And if you remember back when we started giving vaccines in December, there was a very small period of time, a few weeks, when some of the first people getting the vaccination were having like an anaphylactic shock type allergic reaction. And it turns out that a number of the people who had that, they were just allergic to a bunch of different things, or they had previously been allergic to vaccines, or in some cases I think it was even psychological. But the news media just blew this up. And eventually, once people realized it wasn't a pervasive issue, suddenly the news stories just stopped magically. I wonder why. Well, this Johnson & Johnson thing is a similar case where the anti-vaccination movement, which I'm not a fan of, seized on this, the FDA pausing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the news that it could cause clots. They seized on it and ran with it, and I'm afraid the consequences are going to be rather dire. Because if we go over, we're going to jump over to Bloomberg. They have their vaccine tracker, and I mentioned this previously when I did a vaccine video. It's a great tracker, great website. Take a look at this. This is vaccinations in the U.S. And, well, let's just say, whoops. Let's back that up just a little bit. Here we go. So what happened? Right? What happened? Right around the time the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was frozen by the FDA, the vaccinations have been plummeting. This is terrifying because we know that COVID is far more dangerous than the vaccines. And we also know that there's a decent segment of the population who are skeptical or who are afraid of the vaccine, reluctant. This does not help. And before you say that this is just a supply problem, as in people aren't able to get vaccinated because we didn't have one of the vaccines available for a couple weeks, know that there was enough of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines available to cover pretty much all of the demand. So what you're seeing here, this decline, this is not a supply problem, it's a demand problem. And it shifted all of a sudden right when that announcement was made. And maybe some of it also had to do with the news reports from the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe, which had also been found to occasionally cause clotting issues. But this is going to have real consequences, and by that I mean it may reduce our ability to reach herd immunity, or at the very least it might push it out several months. And it will almost certainly lead to more deaths than actually I guarantee you will 100% will lead to more deaths than the vaccine would have caused had it not been paused. Both due to a combination of people not getting it just because it wasn't available, but mainly because people are now convinced that they don't want it. So I'm not quite sure what the FDA was thinking. There's a way in which they could have done this. Maybe just announcing the findings, announcing what they thought the relative risk level was, and letting people make up their own mind. I think that would have been a more sensible way to do it. but we're all going to pay the price for this. And I know that the rationale among the people who defend this decision is something along the lines of, well, if we didn't publicize it, if we didn't stop the vaccine and didn't investigate, and then later it comes out that this is an issue, then that by itself is going to cause vaccine skepticism, because it's going to invite questions like, well, what else are they hiding? Why didn't they let us know? And I get that line of thinking. I think that's fair. But I think the decision that they went with is too far in the other direction. It was too cautious. And there's a middle ground in there that they probably should have tried to walk a little bit better than they did. Because if I go over to to Twitter as an example, I mean, you can just look at what happens with people who find this out and then run with it. It's a no for me, but thanks. All about the money. No one really gives a damn about our lives. This is a breaking news Twitter site that is usually good for breaking headlines, but let's just say the comments can be a little questionable. So why would you willingly get the J&J vaccine? Not FDA approved. So yeah, this is the kind of like gutter level stuff that you see on the internet. But it's real, right? I mean, people think this and they're distrustful, and there's plenty of reasons to be distrustful of the government, but the science behind these vaccines is pretty clear. The safety is pretty clear. We've given the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to 7 million people. 6 experienced clotting issues, and I think 2 died. Which, obviously that's unfortunate. That sucks. I feel for them and their families. But this is something that we kind of have to do a national level cost-benefit risk analysis. And we're not very good at doing that. But if you do it, and you do it properly, you'll realize that the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh the costs by a large multiple. So I think that's it for today. Let me know what you think about the Chauvin verdict, the trial, and what you think about this business with the FDA and the vaccine. Curious as to what your thoughts are. I promise you it will not be this long before I release another video again. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, but I do look forward to seeing you again for future episodes of Real Talk Rudy. Please do me a favor. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you later.